Analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar. Open access to gurus Tony and Scott. We have great questions coming in now, but there's still room for a few more as we hang around for a little overtime. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Scott, Tony, or myself to respond. And let's start with a question. Well, Brian had a question. I think he had to leave at the top of the hour. Let me hold that one and try to get to questions for those who are actively in the session. First question from Menling. I think I'll answer this myself initially. Do you analyze data for clients? We do, and we can. Happy to talk with you about that. It's not what we focus on, actually. It's not what sets us apart. We can do it as well as anyone else. Our focus is more on helping organizations to stand up their own internal practice, giving them the guidance and the structure, the roadmap, and the knowledge transfer to collaboratively work with our clients to stand up that internal practice and then hand it off. Having said that, we can certainly support the analysis of data, but it should be something that you can do ultimately on your own with the right kind of guidance. So we would rather help you to do it than do it for you. But if you have a time crunch, something of that nature, we can certainly help. Feel free to catch me offline, Eric, E-R-I-C, at the-modeling-agency.com. Ying asks, when the data is fragmented and incomplete, is it practical to use data mining? It's a two-part question. Let me start on this one. We'll divide these into two separate questions because they are kind of unrelated. Ying asks, when the data is fragmented and incomplete, is it practical to use data mining? I know, Scott, you had a little trouble with your audio. Let's see if you're back.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly. That's great. Yes.
Okay, super. So the way I would answer your question was first, it depends on what you mean by incomplete. There's a whole lot of difference between having data columns that are 5% incomplete versus data columns that are 95% incomplete. I can't recall ever working with data that is complete, to tell you the truth. And of course, part of the discipline of data mining and predictive analytics has to do with how do you actually work with incomplete data.
Good point. Yeah, I guess it is kind of relative. Tony, what would you like to add?
I guess I would very much mirror Scott's comments. I'm not really sure what the issue, the real question here is, because yes, we're interpolating between unknown points based on our historical data, and by definition are working with incomplete data. What I would suggest is that as we go through and deal with those kinds of issues, we want to be very clear that we have all of our possible outcomes represented, because if we don't have examples of outcomes in our training data, there's no way for the model to interpolate between those known points when the known points are unknown. So incomplete data on the right-hand side with our independent variables is really not an issue in the focus of our work. But we do need completeness, or at least recognize the limitations of the incompleteness with our independent variables in our training data.
Good point. Let me extend that question a little bit. There's fragmented and incomplete data. I would imagine that a lot of the methods that are involved in predictive analytics and data mining, they're pretty good noise filters to an extent. And again, it's all relative. The more missing data, obviously, the less we can expect from the results and the accuracy. But the data doesn't necessarily have to be as clean as many perceive, I would think. So let me extend the question that way. Are there methods that are better at handling noisy data and tolerating incomplete data? Scott?
Well, I'm stuttering a little bit because the whole purpose of predictive analytics is that very exact estimation. Really, what I would do is I would turn the question around and say, how much tolerance are we willing to accept in terms of the estimates themselves? As far as the data goes, we do have methods to estimate missing data or fragmented data, or however we want to define it. It's really on the other side of the coin that really matters. How much variability are we willing to accept in terms of the results of those estimations?
Outstanding. And that, I think that directly relates to the second part of Ying's question. Is it practical, when you have data that's fragmented and incomplete, is it practical to use data mining? And that's where the big "it depends," as us consultants love to say all the time. It really depends, but that can be defined by how much fault tolerance do you have. And Tony, when we had done assessments in the past, I think that's where you had established with clients, how many false positives can we endure, and establishing a lot of the metrics by which we're going to set those tolerances and define what success is or what can be tolerated. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I really would, and I'd like to shift the perspective here just a little bit and go back and take this back into practical realities. The issue is not whether or not what we're doing is right, whether or not our data is completely clean. It really is, can we do a better job than what we're doing today? And in many cases, that's all we're looking for. We're looking for an incremental enhancement. Yes, I'd love to have perfectly clean data, but the reality of implementing that is often not the case. Can I get a performance enhancement for my business issues by doing a better job with the data that I have in front of me? And I think the big threat to that is doing things with the model development effort to really clean up our training and test and validation data sets, and then we can't replicate it when we go live. I would rather have messy data that is consistent with what the model is going to see in a live environment and have a good judgment of what the performance is going to be relative to our current decision processes than do an artificial job of cleaning up data for the purpose of our development effort and then have it come back with real-world data and have the model not work when we take it live.
That's so out of character for you to force us to shift our perspective and thinking. Thanks for that, Tony. And it's common for me to be sarcastic, right? So that's great perspective. Thanks very much, Tony. Second part of Ying's question, what experiences and skills are needed to understand data mining? I would think, obviously, you've got to go out and get yourself PhDs in statistics and mathematics and be able to deconstruct and reconstruct the innards of a neural network. Am I on the right path here? Let's start with you this time, Tony.
Speaking of sarcasm, and we want to make very sure that the people in attendance are recognize that as such.
Right.
I think there are multiple skill sets here, and we do need, especially in today's environment, we have very sophisticated data infrastructures. We're pulling in new data from a wide variety of resources that often lead to the kinds of data cleaning and data representation and capture issues that we're talking about. We have people with very strong quantitative skills. I think the one thing that needs to be, the one skill set that needs to be more heavily brought to the table and participation in our project teams is our domain experts. We need to have them with at least a basic understanding and an ability to communicate what their needs are effectively, because the single biggest problem that we run into with today's environment, we're technically very sophisticated and we develop these elegant solutions for the wrong business problems. We don't meet the goals of business. This has to be business driven. We're not doing quantitative analytics. We're doing business analytics, and we need to enhance performance first.
Absolutely, and that's the right perspective to have. And thanks for pointing out, because some people do misread my sarcasm, especially those who don't know me as long. And by all means, the focus is not a technical endeavor. And as we already illustrated, it's not about just getting at the data and the software. There's a lot of soft skills that come into the practice in order to really achieve success. Scott, would you like to add?
Well, very briefly, I look at what we do as an art and a science. Of course, it certainly helps, and I would never try to discourage somebody from trying to get a good academic background. But the application of those academics is something that can't be taught. It requires some innate abilities, such as intuitiveness, in addition to the technical foundation that you get. After all, what we do, a lot of people are concerned about the algorithms, but the algorithms are just tools, and the tools are never any more powerful than the person who's using the tool.
Great point. Absolutely. Thank you both. And Elizabeth asks, what's the difference or relationship between between predictive analytics and data mining. We use both in the title, and I think in many ways they are the same, and in some ways they're different. Scott, let's start with your perception of what's similar and what's different about predictive analytics versus data mining.
Well, they interconnect and they overlap. It certainly has a lot to do with your own perspective. It's like coming up with a definition of music. We can all agree that we hear music most of the time when we hear music, but defining it is a whole lot different. I tend to say that data mining is the discovery of previously unknown and useful patterns within data through the assistance of algorithms and technology in large data sets, and predictive analytics is the application or the projection of those patterns onto other data sets for future purposes, generally for future purposes. Of course, like I said, it has to do, it's a philosophical definition. Some people say that data mining is looking in the rearview mirror backwards, and predictive analytics is looking through the shield forward.
Right. Yeah, I've also heard the rowboat versus the canoe as well, and I think that's a fantastic definition. One's a little more descriptive, although still looking at interrelationships across our data points as opposed, extending beyond traditional statistics. Data mining is not just rear view. It's got, you can pull out much more meaningful information than that, and predictive analytics has the forward-looking view. Tony, anything to add? Any other perspectives that we should consider in the terms? Even though, like Scott says, everyone can kind of apply their own definition, but is there a standard that you think you can apply?
Well, yeah, and I'm very much agreement with Scott's definition. I twist the wording on a little bit differently. Having lived through this development, data mining was very much focused on using quantitative techniques and data to find new interesting patterns in the data, finding new relationships, insights that we didn't know before, and it took a very technical perspective. For me, an approach that I currently focus on, and the distinction I make with predictive analytics is it's goal-driven analytics, and it is based on enhancing business where we use the technologies, and we are looking for new relationships and simplifying relationships in complex environments, but we're business-oriented, goal-oriented first.
Outstanding. This is why the Q&A is so great to have both of you on board, to have different experiences, different ways to look at each question, very beneficial to the participants. Evan asks, how is big data taking the place of traditional market research? Feel free to bend this question a little bit if it's appropriate to go outside of research and maybe talk in terms of how it's impacting analytics. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, particularly when it comes to the size of data and analytics as a whole. I think size in general doesn't matter as much as people perceive, but then again, how we get at and utilize data for analytics, I think does have some validity, and I think, Tony, you've been experiencing that a little bit more and coming to some more recent realizations in some of the conferences you've been attending to stay current, and that's been affecting how you think about big data and analytics. Maybe that's a better way to take the question of how's big data taking the place, Evan says, of traditional market research, but feel free to just respond to that in terms of analytics.
Well, and my perception of big data is evolving, but is stabilizing a great deal at this point because it has covered so many different areas. The biggest problem I have with the whole big data approach and thinking at this point is the idea that more data is better, and that we're blending the quantity of data that needs, from an IT perspective, to be captured and organized. It's a huge issue from IT. It's not as much of an issue from an analytics perspective. We still need to do the same things with the same approaches and realistically with about the same amount of data. I don't need any more data today than I did 10, 15, 20 years ago. I just have more data available, and it's how do I handle that from an IT perspective in capturing it, organizing it, cleaning it, delivering it, and looking at it effectively. And I don't think it is a replacement for marketing techniques that have been utilized in the past. I think we've got some different data issues. I think we've got some different domain issues. We've got some operational constraints. But unfortunately, I almost see it rolling back into the data mining mentality where we're dealing with all of this new stuff. And we're not real sure what to do with it, and we don't want to miss anything, and we lose track that when we find something, what does that mean? The key question is still, so what? It's not what's new, and how do we make that work in our business? It is really, I think, the mentality we need to bring into play. It's not a replacement for existing marketing techniques. We've got additional data available to us and some different things that we can do with it, and that's what we need to figure out, again, on the domain side, on the business side.
And of course, we'll flip over to Scott here in a moment for the last word, because this will be the final question. But before I go to Scott, did you want to also put something into perspective as well in terms of big data versus fat data?
Oh, I think very much so. Big, and it's a definition you've heard me use. We get very concerned with the number of records, and we are capturing huge volumes in terms of record counts today. That's not my issue as an analyst. My issue is how many fields do I have, which is the fat data analogy. It's like books in a library. There's a whole bunch of books in the library that when I'm studying for any particular topic, I don't need all of them. But the librarian has captured all of these books, and I need to figure out how to condense them down into the set of books that I actually need to address my topic, and which ones have an impact for the kinds of things that I'm looking at. As an analyst, that's always been my issue. I've always had more data than I knew what to do with. Today we're just seeing that being magnified and exaggerated, but the real issue for me is finding the right fields that help me anticipate outcomes of future events that impact my business performance. As an analyst, that's my concern.
Good point, and I don't know if you heard the term. I love this term, dark data. It's drawn from dark matter, that everyone's collecting so much data, and 98% of it won't really have meaning to the specific problem at hand, so you have to find the smaller set of data that's going to be applicable to the business questions you want to answer. And so there's all this dark data out there that's, it's available, it's collected, it's managed, it's costly actually in total to collect and manage and store and organize. But at the end of the day, you really have to look at the data and transform the data that's going to be applicable to the problem. Outside of all that dark data, it's the data that really has meaning for your own universe. Scott, final word on big data and analytics.
Okay, I'm gonna piggyback off of Tony's and your excellent response and give it just a slightly different twist after we get it.
Great.
First of all, I don't even know what big data is. I mean,
yep. I agree.
To give a little bit of a cynicism to it, I've been in this business for 30 years, and there hasn't been one point in that entire time when we didn't have more data than we can deal with. So if you're new to this field, big data is a very sexy term that marketers are using to leverage and get a lot of interest and a lot of excitement. But if you're an old hat like myself, you don't see it as revolutionary. You tend to see it as evolutionary rather than revolutionary. We're still on the same line that I've been on for the last 30 years. It's just evolving as it would be expected to do. Now, from a Gartner perspective, they tend to talk about big data as, in terms of volume, variety, and velocity. Okay, that's cool stuff. We do have, out of those three terms, we do have more sources of data than we did before. But to be more specific in terms of the question that was happening, that was asked about marketing research, I go back to a story that Eric and I have talked about several times. When color television was invented, they thought that was going to be the death of the movie industry, and it certainly did have an impact on the movie industry because people were enamored with color television and they didn't go to the movies as much. But over time, what actually happened was movies didn't go away, movie theaters didn't go away. They just evolved, and now we have a world where we have movie theaters and color television, and they complement each other. They actually work together. I think the same thing is true in terms of market research and big data. If we're talking about unstructured online data, a lot of effort is being put forth to try to research and get customer opinions from unstructured online social network data. and it certainly is exciting. There's lots of it out there. It's starting to become more constrained, for example, from some of the network sites. However, I think ultimately what's going to happen is it's going to find its own place and will be complementary to traditional market research rather than a substitute for marketing research.
Fantastic response, and I'm completely with you on big data. Glad to know I'm not alone on that. I think Tony has an extra word. Yes?
Yeah, I do. I would like to have just one more minute if I could.
Sure. Yeah.
Just in fairness to this, both Scott and I and you have been talking about this from an analyst perspective, and it's where I struggled with the whole big data issue for a long time. And in fairness, I want to bring this back into an IT perspective as well and say that we are seeing huge shift on the IT side and a huge growth in the amount of data and their responsibilities in capturing that and doing all of the work that they do with that is a different issue and is a significant issue. But it is a different set of issues from what we're dealing with from the analyst perspective. And again, my real concern is that these two skill sets and perspectives are being blended inappropriately. We've got a large volume of data that we do need to capture and organize appropriately. And what you're really seeing is a shift in the fundamental architecture away from doing transaction-based processing systems that we've done for the last 20, 25 years with relational databases and all of the work going back to C.J. Date's work and how to do that effectively, and a shift in the architecture and the way we're capturing, storing, and organizing the data into systems that support analytics. And dealing with more flat files, dealing with more agile implementation so that we can adapt more readily. Those are all IT issues. Those are not analytic issues. The IT issues are very, very real in dealing with that. But the analytics, once that's done, really hasn't shifted much.
No, and I'm glad you made you distinguish it that way, because it is a real problem. Not that it's new. It's a new term to problems that we've had for quite a long time. There's different ways that we're approaching it to organize volumes in which we haven't seen in the past. But yeah, it really is more of an IT concern than it is an analytic concern. Not that they're separate. There are ways in which the data can be purposed to be more agile for analytics. But in the end, I think we were all a little bit slow to get as excited about big data from an analyst perspective, because as Scott had said, it's been an evolution. And when it comes to analytics, it has much more to do with how we target and transform the data than it is to be excited about more and more data. No, that's the great perspectives on both sides. We're getting compliments coming in by text. Max, I know you were a little apprehensive at the beginning. I'm glad you saw some value as we went on here, and our perspectives on, like you say, some of the old tools that are becoming much more relevant today, largely because of, I mean, we owe thanks to big data and the groundswell that it's creating for analytics. Now people are becoming even more data rich, but they're just as information poor. Well, how are they going to get the ROI on all of that, that massive data? It's going to come from advanced analytics, and advanced analytics need not be a hard, sophisticated technology. People just need some strategic guidance to set up the process and step through it. And the tools will handle the mathematical sophistication, but there is some seasoned guidance to understand how to prepare the data and define the problem and transform the data. And the modeling is actually the more straightforward part of the entire project. It's more around the comprehensive assessment, the project definition, and purposing the models in a way that's going to have a true impact for the organization and translate in terms that leadership can appreciate. One final question that's a popular one we usually get earlier, and here it is. Alfred asks, is it possible to have the presentation after the webinar? We do not record it. We do offer it live monthly, so you can go back to the website /webinar, or if you go anywhere on our website, you'll see a link to the webinar page from the nav bar, and you can register for next month's event. Come back with new questions. Like I say, it's a live event every time, so think about what you'd like to ask us when you return, and we'll be happy to address your questions, as you've seen in this event, from 2 or 3 different perspectives. But at 25 after the hour, I'm actually late for my next appointment, so we're going to draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Tony and Scott for your great segments, and of course, your your valuable and sometimes entertaining Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we hope you'll offer permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter and consider joining us at a public training event soon. Now recall that the DC class is nearly full, and with just 3 seats remaining and counts being finalized for material, you'll need to move quickly to ensure your space. Thereafter, you can save 10% on your Las Vegas course series registration if you sign up by September 23rd. Now, if you would like to benefit for your early efforts, instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive in the online registration form, and don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Wire Support program. Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then we'll remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Wire Support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.